Andrew Johnson was the 17th President of the United States, serving from 1865 to 1869. He assumed office after the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln and faced many challenges during his presidency, including the task of rebuilding the country after the Civil War and addressing the issue of race relations. After the Civil War, Johnson faced the task of reconstructing the southern states and reuniting the country. He implemented a Reconstruction policy that was characterized by a lenient approach towards the defeated Confederate states and placed a greater emphasis on restoring civil order and stability. Johnson's Reconstruction policy included a series of pardons and amnesties to Confederate leaders and soldiers, which allowed them to return to their homes and reclaim their property without facing any legal consequences. This was in contrast to Lincoln's Reconstruction plan, which called for more stringent conditions for the readmission of the Confederate states. Johnson's policy sought to restore civil government to the Confederate states as quickly as possible. He appointed provisional governors to oversee the transition, and he encouraged the states to hold elections and form new governments. President Johnson strongly opposed the plans of the radical Republicans in Congress, who sought to impose more stringent conditions on the Confederate states and to give African Americans a greater role in the political and economic life of the South. He vetoed several Reconstruction bills passed by Congress, including the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which granted African Americans citizenship and equal protection under the law. This was due to Johnson being a strong believer in states' rights and his opposition to federal interventions in matters of race. This placed him at odds with many Northern Republicans, who were pushing for civil rights legislation and equal treatment for African Americans. Johnson's relationship with Congress was strained, and he faced several attempts to impeach him. In 1868, the House of Representatives voted to impeach Johnson. It was the first time in United States history that a president had been impeached by the House of Representatives. This was a significant event in American history because it demonstrated the power of Congress to hold the president accountable for his actions and to check abuses of executive power. The conflicts between Johnson and Congress over Reconstruction policy led to a series of legislative and political battles, and eventually to the impeachment of President Johnson. In 1867, Congress passed the Tenure of Office Act, which prohibited the president from removing certain federal officials without the consent of the Senate. In defiance of this law, President Johnson removed Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, a key ally of the radical Republicans, from office. In response, the House of Representatives voted to impeach President Johnson on February 24, 1868, charging him with high crimes and misdemeanors for violating the Tenure of Office Act. The impeachment trial was held in the Senate, and the senators voted on whether to remove Johnson from office. To be convicted, the Senate needed to reach a two-thirds majority, or at least 35 out of the 52 senators present. In the final vote on May 16, 1868, the Senate fell one vote short of the required two-thirds majority, with 35 senators voting to convict and 19 senators voting to acquit. Thus, Johnson was ultimately acquitted of the charges and allowed to remain in office. Andrew Johnson was the president when the United States purchased Alaska from Russia in 1867. The purchase of Alaska, also known as the Alaska Purchase, was initiated by the administration of President James Buchanan and completed under the administration of President Andrew Johnson. The process of the Alaska Purchase began in 1859. When the United States sent diplomatic envoy Edward Morris to Russia to negotiate the purchase of Alaska. At the time, Russia was interested in selling Alaska due to the high cost of maintaining its territorial holdings in North America, and the United States was interested in acquiring Alaska due to its strategic location and potential for economic development. After several years of negotiations, the United States and Russia reached an agreement in which the United States would purchase Alaska for $7.2 million, or approximately 2 cents per acre. The agreement was signed on March 30, 1867, and the United States officially took possession of Alaska on October 18, 1867. President Andrew Johnson sent Secretary of State William Henry Seward to play a key role in securing the necessary funding and support for the purchase, and in negotiating the final terms of the agreement with Russia. Overall,